Good morning, boys and girls, and happy Tuesday. Today we are on Unit 11, the Civil War, and we're working on chapters 19 and 20. A couple reminders before we start our lesson is that to complete any active assessments on Edulastic, double check, triple check, just make sure all assessments are completed. Also, iReady Math and Reading. Make sure that you are working on iReady Math and Reading at least 10 minutes a day for each subject. That should get you about 45 minutes to 50 minutes at the end of the week. That is our goal for iReady. Also, complete math and ELA assignments and watch their videos. So our agenda today looks a little bit different than in the past. We have a quick little warm-up. I'm going to state the objectives of what we're expected to learn from chapters 19 and 20. I'm going to read the big question. I will read chapter 19 to you. You are going to read chapter 20 on your own, and then you're going to do some independent work, and I'm going to have a little bit more reminders and say our goodbyes for the day. So our quick warm-up, who am I? I'm going to read all three statements to you. These statements are in your packet for today's work. So you can also follow along to this video to what's in the packet. So I'm going to read the statements and then I'm going to have you pause the video and try to think of these answers to see if you remember from previous chapters. Once you're ready, you're going to unpause the video and the answers will be revealed. So number one says, I left Congress to fight them in the Mexican-American War. I later served as a U.S. Senator and as a Secretary of War. Who am I? Number two, we were forced to work on the farms to help produce cotton. Who are we? I am the belief that the federal government should have less power and the state government should have more power. What vocabulary word am I? Go ahead and pause the video and take a few seconds to think about these answers. All right, thank you for pausing the video. Let's go over the answers. Number one, I left Congress to fight in the Mexican-American War. I later served as a U.S. Senator and the Secretary of War during the Civil War. This person is Jefferson Davis. If you got him, go ahead and give yourself a pat on the back. We were forced to work on the farms to help produce cotton. Who are we? Of course, that is slaves and slavery. Yes, they had to force into the workforce to produce cotton. I am the belief that the federal government should have less power and the state government should have more power. What vocabulary word am I? That's right, I am states' rights. So today's objective is that today we're going to learn about what led to the end of the Civil War and why President Lincoln was assassinated. So your two objectives for today. I can explain how the military campaigns of Grant and Sherman helped end the war, including the fall of Richmond and Sherman's march to the sea of the burning Atlanta. I can explain why John Wilkes Booth's reasons for assassinating President Lincoln. So our big question for chapter 19 is, how did the Union finally defeat the Confederacy? So that's what you're going to want to listen out for as we're reading today. Quick introduction. The Confederacy experienced numerous problems that prevented it from effectively waging war. In addition to the conflict between the Confederate States and the persistent inability of the states to cooperate, Jefferson Davis often undermined his generals, and the Confederacy failed to secure the support of France and Great Britain during the war. We will learn about the final days of the Civil War, and as we read this chapter, look for how the Union finally defeated the Confederacy. Chapter 19, the war draws to a close. A battle in the wilderness. Fight and fight some more, then chase. That is exactly what Grant and his army did in the spring of 1864. Once again, the scene was Northern Virginia. Once again, the prize was Richmond, and once again, the armies met and did battle near Chancellorsville, where 1 year earlier, Lee had won his most brilliant victory. But this time it was different. The fighting took place in defense The fighting took place in a dense forest known as the Wilderness. Grant's army outnumbered Lee's by nearly 2-1. The Battle of the Wilderness raged for 2 days. It was terrible, bloody battle, and at the end, Grant had lost more men than Lee. But Grant knew that his losses could be replaced, and Lee's could not. Lee had to pull back, stopping several times to fight some more. Grant's army continued to press forward toward Richmond and Petersburg, an important railroad center near Richmond. Finally, Grant had his armies in position to begin a siege in front of the two cities. That summer, autumn and winter, Grant's army kept Lee's troops in Richmond and Petersburg from breaking out. They could only retreat and abandon the cities. Meanwhile, General William Tecumseh Sherman, who was now in charge of the Union forces in the West, prepared to tighten the squeeze of the anaconda. With an army of 90,000, Sherman set out from Tennessee toward the important railroad city of Atlanta. Sherman did not worry about food for his army. He would take that from the farms along the way. In September of 1864, Atlanta fell to the Union troops. From there, Sherman led his army on a march to the sea. During the march, he used a method of warfare sometimes called total war. Sherman not only fought the other side's soldiers, but he also destroyed farms, burned warehouses and barns, and wrecked shops, and tore up rail lines. Although civilians were not targeted, Sherman did whatever he could to weaken the enemy. In December, the coastal city of Savannah, Georgia fell. By January, Sherman was in South Carolina. By March, he was in North Carolina. Everywhere his armies went, they left behind destruction and hatred and bitterness too. By this time, Abraham Lincoln had been re-elected to a second term in office. The presidential election during the war showed the strength of the American democracy, that even during a civil war, the laws of the Constitution were followed. Lincoln's opponent was none other than the general he had removed from his command, George B. McClellan. McClellan said that if elected, he would end the war quickly. To people who were tired of the war, sick of the terrible losses, and even fearful of actual losing, that was very appealing. Lincoln determined to see the war through to the end in order to preserve the Union and free the slaves. Could make no such promise. For a time, he expected to lose the election. Then came the news of Sherman's capture of Atlanta and several other Union victories. Northern spirits rose, and Lincoln easily won re-election. By the time Lincoln's second term began, in March of 1865, it was clear that the Confederacy was doomed. Lincoln realized that it was time to get Americans to focus on the next great task before them, reuniting the nation. Would it be possible after 4 years of killing and destruction for people to understand the pain and suffering of those on the other side? Many Northerners talked of revenge. They wanted to get even for what the South's secession had caused. Many wanted to treat the Southerners as a conquered people, with malice toward none. That was not Lincoln's way. The Union was preserved, slavery was ended. For Lincoln, that was enough. The job was now to get back to being one nation, the United States of America, and to fulfill the nation's promise of greatness. President Lincoln announced his plan for restoring the Union. It was a plan to bring the Southern states back into the Union quickly, without harsh punishment. In his second inaugural address on March 4th, 1865, he urged Americans to adopt a forgiving spirit as they set about this task, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. All that remained was for Grant's armies to finish the job. A month after Lincoln's speech, Petersburg and Richmond fell. Lee tried to gather his weary and hungry army once more, but Union forces followed him. There was finally no way out. On April 9th, Lee sent an officer with a white flag of surrender to the Union Army and asked to meet with the General Grant. The surrender took place at a house in a village of Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. Grant wrote out the terms of the surrender and treated the defeated enemy with great respect. The Confederates would turn in their weapons except for the officers' small guns. All were free to leave, and Grant added, "Let all the men who claim to own a horse or mule take the animals home with them to work their little farms." It was a generous offer, and Lee thanked Grant for it. The two generals saluted each other. Then Lee climbed on his horse. Traveler looked thoughtfully over the field of the Union soldiers and rode away. The American Civil War was over. All right, scholars, so that concludes the end of chapter 19. So for your independent work, you're going to notice it's very similar to our packet format of when we were in class together. So if you look carefully here, you're going to notice that I always put section titles. Whoops, there we go. Let's try that again. I always place section titles where you can find the answers to the questions that follow the section title. So in this section title, in chapter 19, you're going to go to a battle in the wilderness. That was the very first section of the chapter. Now let's read our question. What was Grant's biggest advantage over Lee in the spring of 1864? So again, you're going to go to this section and you're going to look for Grant's biggest advantage over Lee in the spring of 1864. So in that section, they're going to describe what Grant's advantages were. Here in the chart, I just want you in note form to list the disadvantage. So this can be note taking. You do not have to type a lot in these little lines. These lines are just to help you take some good notes. And on this side here, you're going to list Lee's disadvantages. So again, one side is Grant's advantages and then Lee's disadvantages, okay? Now you're going to do this for the next part. There is another question that follows this about Lincoln's inaugural speech. After you're done filling out the chart and answering that question of Lincoln's inaugural speech, then you're going to go ahead and read chapter 20. Now, as you notice in the packet, again, you're going to see questions that align with chapter 20. My suggestion to you is first read the chapter in its entirety, then go back and try to answer the questions in the packet for a couple of reasons. This will help you to retain the information. This will help you to have higher rates of comprehension because you're not constantly stopping during your reading to answer questions. So make sure to read it first, understand what the chapter is saying. A good way to double check your own understanding is to see if you can answer that big question at the end of the chapter, which is why did John Wilkes Booth kill President Lincoln? If you can answer that by the time you finish reading, then you've understood the major concept of the chapter. Then you can go into answering those questions. It will just make it easier for you to answer the questions if you read the chapter first. So here's what the independent work will look like. Again, notice how I have the section header here. So this section header of chapter 20 is where you're going to find this answer. Who was John Wilkes Booth and what was his plan to gain fame? So in this section, you will be able to answer this question. You're going to continue with that progress until you reach to the end of the questions in the packet. Again, if you have any questions about how to fill out this part, you can always just call Ms. Corkins. All right, so that is the end of our lesson today. It's up to you to do the rest. Some reminders and goodbyes before we end is to complete any active assessments on Edulastic. Again, make sure iReady math and reading is being completed. Try to aim for 10 minutes of math and 10 minutes of reading per day. By the end of the week, you should have at least 50 minutes of each subject, which is pretty close to our expectation of that 45 minutes. Complete math and ELA assignments and videos. Make sure that we are tracking on GoGuardian, but just make sure you're using your computer for school and for fun. It's okay to go on a fun website every once in a while, but make sure it's kid appropriate, and also make sure you're still turning in your work because we are tracking assignments as they are being submitted to us through text. All right, scholars, if you have any questions, I hope you reach out to us. We are here for you. And I hope you have a great day. It looks like it's going to be a beautiful one. All right, guys. I miss you so much. You have a great day. Bye.